Dying Light, the first of its kind, an open-world parkour zombie survival game where you are given absolute freedom in how you approach the world. With the excellent post-launch content, Dying Light had become a game with a huge fan base. Devoted and inspired by the developers' efforts to keep the game growing, the fan base mirrored such growth by frequently returning to the game. As someone who put in a substantial amount of time into the first game, I was on the edge of my seat once I found out there would be a sequel. A bigger world, better parkour, RPG mechanics. Yes, please. I followed the game eagerly, waiting for any small snippet to grace me with its presence, and as the release date grew closer, so did my excitement, and that only grew even with the delays. So here it is. Without further ado, this is the Dying Light 2 review. Enjoy. A vast improvement from Dying Light 1, I must say. What also was quite astounding is the level of detail across the whole city. It feels like everything was handcrafted.
Bruh.
It looks fantastic, the sun gently radiating on the horizon, casting a golden blanket as far as the eyes can see. You'd almost be fooled into thinking this wasn't a zombie game. There were frequent times when my jaw dropped at how beautiful the landscape was. The moon had a similar effect, the lunar rays gently bouncing off the surfaces, providing an almost tranquil view, if it wasn't for the sound of someone's guts being torn out only 100 meters away. The vastness of the world is plain to see from the giant skyscrapers, power stations, and even the small shacks. All shapes and sizes are included in this game, be it building, human, or infected. The infected look great, with a wide variety of different looking generic zombies. They wear different outfits, which lean into the narrative that Villedor was living and breathing as a city. The specials look equally impressive, with new species being thrown out into the mix for that extra flavor. Speaking of characters, they're incredibly fleshed out. The detail has been dialed to 11 from the first game. There's a real sense of gritty realism when looking at the characters as if they had been through their own trials and tribulations. Scars, scratches, and even indentations on the character models go a long way into creating a believable atmosphere. Characters go about their lives, having a variety of conversations while doing their activities. The visual prowess is second to none when it comes to zombie games. Genuinely, I can't think of a game in the same genre that looks as great as this game. The expansive nature of the world means there's so much to see. Now, although there are a lot of handcrafted things in the game, you can see where things have been copy and pasted, especially when it comes to the layout of certain buildings that you'd run through. Skyscrapers in the second area are the biggest offenders of this. Saying that though, I didn't notice it enough for it to be an issue. It goes to show that a lot of detail and care has been put into the world, crafted with meticulous supervision, and the devs really cared about giving us a world to explore and fall in love with. I really appreciate RPG elements of a game. In fact, I appreciate RPG elements in most games. I've always thought they added an extra layer of depth when done right. I can see what Techland were going for here. There's a lot of love. However, some elements miss the mark. For instance, dialogue choices that you get to make mostly don't matter that much. Throughout the game, you get to make choices that allow for the allocation of crucial resources: water, electricity, food. Allocating these to one of two factions, the Peacekeepers or the Survivors. This will then, in turn, add several elements to the game, whether this will be traps in the world or unique traversal tools like zip lines. Now these are great for adding to the overall gameplay, but it adds little to no value to the actual story. The NPCs that you have just betrayed will pretty much just give you a slap on the wrist, and 2 missions later you'll be helping them again. At no point is there a tangible effect on the story. No former allies aggroing against you. or perhaps even setting traps against you to try to eliminate you. None of that is present, which would have been a really nice extra layer to the RPG mechanics to give you some semblance of consequence through actions. You also have crafting, a skill tree, and gear rated in a traditional RPG fashion with different colors to symbolize the rarity, each weapon having its own unique design and special effects in relation to the mods you use on it. Crafting can be a bit of an ordeal though, as many of the best materials require you to hunt down special infected in order to upgrade your most powerful tools. And oh boy, are there a lot of upgrades to pursue. While you're exploring the world, doing the abundance of side quests, main missions and events, you'll gain XP which feed either into your parkour or your combat, but you can only acquire the perks of said trees by upgrading your stamina or health through these inhibitors that you find in these special labs within the game. This process can be a little tedious if you're not a night runner. It felt like XP came at an excruciatingly slow pace at points. These skills do have a noticeable impact though. I went with the parkour tree first, and the added mobility meant that I was outmaneuvering everything and accelerating my way to death as I attempted more and more ludicrous stunts. Now on to the not so good aspects of the game. The combat. It felt watered down, a former shell of its former glory. Upon reflecting on this issue, it seems that this stems from the RPG aspects with the enemies, each enemy being assigned an arbitrary number and inflated health balls associated with such numbers. Combat in the original game felt visceral. Each hit with a weapon was either skull-crunching, clean-cutting or electrifying. It felt meaningful. You could kneecap enemies, preventing them from attacking you, chop off their limbs, stopping grabs, or even decapitating them with a well-placed strike to the nape of the neck. All of that is gone. It wasn't until I hit a level cap and was using an incredibly overpowered weapon well above the enemy's level that I actually felt like my hits meant anything. That's a terrible experience in my opinion. Why do we have to go most of the game feeling that we are using foam toys? Even with the plethora of mods that we have available, the combat still isn't impactful until much later on. The last point I'll make is that the general difficulty of the world as you're exploring is much easier than the originals, due to the fact that the most powerful infected, called volatiles, no longer roam the streets at night. Anyone who has played the previous game knows that these infected made the world lethal.
Run.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
They were faster, stronger, and have absolutely massive amounts of HP. It's a shame that you only really encounter them indoors, or if you get your chase meter to level 4, which almost never happens. You're always outmaneuvering the infected, and it's a much easier time by the time your stamina bar has grown. There is a special enemy called a Howler, which brings down the affected onto your position from every angle, but again, there really is no real threat to you provided you keep moving. On closing, many of the RPG elements landed well, but the generic leveling system really hindered the experience. I would definitely recommend some tweaks to how spongy the enemies are, looking at the levels and maybe bringing back the harder enemies at night to make the experience more wholesome and well-rounded. When will my character stop getting punched in the face? Seriously, he's always getting sucker punched in literally every other cutscene. The guy is a magnet for it, and for a superhuman, he really has bad reflexes. Anyways, moving on. The story is passable. Nothing amazing, nothing too outrageous, equal parts cringe and well written. But I suppose you can kind of expect that in a game like this. Dying Light 2 is carried by its strong cast for the most part, but our character is pretty much the most bland, one-track vanilla ice cream that you could create. He has a one-track mind, and it is the voice acting that allows him to have a presence. Otherwise you'd probably forget he was even a part of the story at times. Maybe that sounds a little harsh. It's just that the performance of every other character is excellent in my opinion. I actually wanted to spend more time with these other major characters, but the story quickly progresses from character to character without much leisure time. On missions where you're accompanied by someone, I was surprised at how little time we we actually get to spend with them. The characters will often teleport into the next location without so much as a peep, and even when they don't teleport, they often don't say much in transit. It's a little disappointing that a game that leans so heavily on the immersion aspect breaks that immersion with companions who can instant transmission to the next spot on the quest path. You meet dozens of characters and there's really no chemistry between our character and theirs. Lawan, who is played by Rosario Dawson, does a fantastic job of building a unique setting for the two characters, Lawan and Aiden, but her excellent voice work is wasted on this plain white wall of a character. There's a lot of room for growth here. First things first. At the time of releasing this review, Techland have already put out a patch which increases the stability and reduces the occurrence of bugs. My experience with Dying Light 2 was a train wreck, to put it softly. From the get-go I was running into FPS issues, dropped frames, a slight micro stutter as I was moving from one obstacle to the next. And after tweaking some settings, everything seemed to be fine. I was running at 4K at 60 to 80 FPS with everything at max except for the shadows and the ray tracing flashlight. It seemed to hold up well. I played the game for a whole day, in fact. No issues. But when I came back the next day, I couldn't even hold 40 frames a second. Confused, bewildered and annoyed, I then spent the whole hour trying to tweak my settings, religiously watching Digital Foundry's tech breakdown in order to gain an insight on how to run this game at 4K on high settings. What the hell happened, I asked myself. I checked the functionality of my graphics card, ran several benchmarks to confirm everything was okay with my CPU and GPU. Everything was green, so I go back into the game, I tweak even more settings, and eventually the game was running at 60 FPS, but only when I wasn't in a hub environment. Otherwise my frames were tanking. The janky nature of these frames and their drops put a severe dent in my enjoyment of the hub areas, which you usually go to pick up the main quests and the crafting, or just to talk to people. The issues seem to have stemmed from the DLSS, and it appears as if the DLSS was unstable according to the most recent patch. Then we have the bugs. They came in all shapes and sizes. Visual bugs, check. Audio bugs, check. Game breaking bugs, check. Combat bugs, check. I couldn't go more than 5 minutes without seeing a bug, whether it be an NPC inside an NPC like some kind of Matryoshka doll, broken quest lines that refused to trigger, or my interact button breaking. All of these issues were incredibly frustrating, and this was after the Day Zero patch. I played co-op for most of the game and I counted 24 bugs between me and my co-op partner. We both had to reset the game, and as someone who reviews games fairly often, I like to get into a flow state when I play the game so I can come up with a coherent mind map on what I want to talk to you guys about. It was generally so difficult to do that with Dying Light. Now I get that the game is absolutely monstrous in size and scope, and so I've accounted for that in this review. However, there's only so much leeway I can give to a game that's open world. Did I have fun playing the game? Yes, but the bugs and various issues with the graphic settings really dampened my experience. To bring a bit more context to the situation in terms of the hardware, I was running a 3080 with a 10900K, 32GB of RAM, and over 6TB of storage on an SSD. I really saw no reason for my rig to be having this many issues. My technical impression of the game was definitely a detractor from my overall experience.
Faster! Go on! Sorry about this.
What? Sorry about what?
About that. On behalf of all its whores, bandits, and idiots, I christen you a citizen of Villedor. You're about to turn. Get into the light fast. Run!
For the most part, the game was right on the money with the soundtrack. It was excellently crafted for each activity that I found myself doing. One standout moment involved me leaping from rooftop to rooftop, my shoes barely landing cleanly, the crunching of broken glass beneath my heel as I traversed the pandemic-worn chimneys, the soundtrack matching my pace as I plunged from 8 floors onto a map below, hopping over the undead as if I was Mario, propelling myself up to another building, grasping firmly onto a gutter pipe, shimmying along as the infected snapped at the air beneath me, pulling myself up and then darting around the corner to use an air vent as a springboard for my paraglider, all the while the music matching me beat for beat. As I'm coasting through the warm air, gazing at the sun-kissed horizon, I notice an event happening below me. I tilt my paraglider downwards, hovering over the enemies on the ground. I come down with my two-handed hammer and land a satisfying blow on the skull of an infected. As the weapon reverberates off the concaved cranium, I turn sharply 180 degrees to land a dropkick to the closest enemy. I can hear the sound of my character hitting the floor and shifting his weight underneath him. The enemy buckled onto the floor helpless as I land the finishing strike, the visceral collision signaling the end of the combat encounter, or at least I thought. Suddenly I'm surrounded by biters and I have to make my escape using a rope lift. At this point, the music is racing to match Aiden's labored breathing, and as I run towards our haven, I take in the music in all its glory, marveling at the fantastic immersion, and I commend the sound team for providing such an exhilarating soundtrack to accompany all facets of the game. The voice acting was equally impressive, with the heavy hitters in the voice acting scene showing their value in a narrative-driven storyline. I mentioned it before, but the voice work truly carried the flatter parts of the story. Had they had not been there, this game would have been relegated to the bargain bin pile with the other games in the zombie genre. Key moments with these characters strike an emotional chord which will probably resonate with most players who are into these RPG-like moments and are empowered by the detail-orientated sound design. I imagine that there was a very conscientious effort from the entire sound team at Techland to make the music fit the variety of themes at play here, and it was a really good job all around. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the Dying Light 2 review. There is a lot of game here. This is a fantastic game. Now, despite some of the weaker combat, the bland storytelling in certain areas, and then the plethora of bugs, I actually think this is a great addition to any game library, and here's why. The world is very unique, and so is the concept of parkour, zombie, survival, RPG, open world, all these tags. There are not a lot of games that have done this very well, especially the parkour side of things. Now, I don't know about you, but me playing Mirror's Edge, I loved it. I loved the idea of the freedom, but I was always upset that the Mirror's Edge levels were very linear. Here in Dying Light 2, you don't have that problem. Not only that, you have tools to expand that parkour system. They've done an excellent job with the animations, the sound work, and just the general gameplay itself. Now, whenever a game like this comes around where there's so much attention to detail, we really have to look past these small faults that they have to see the core of the game and see the intention of the game. The intention was to give us an amazing open world, and I really think that they delivered here. And sometimes you have to give games and developers and people the benefit of the doubt here so you can truly have something amazing, and I think Dying Light is that. I think it's a phenomenal game. I really had fun with it. My playthrough took about 30 to 40 hours. I did a dozen side quests and I did the main storyline. I had a lot of fun, and I can see there's even more content to come. Now, February. Sifu, Horizon Forbidden West, and then you have Elden Ring, the giant among giants. I'm looking forward to covering all these games. I'm currently covering Sifu. Now, provided if I have enough time, I'll try to get the Sifu review out just before I start Horizon, but I'll do my best, guys. Anyways, this is Alex. This is the Bearded Breakdown. I really hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. And if you really loved it, why not subscribe? Anyways, I'll see you on the next review. Bye.